You just completely ruined my day.
I know.
Okay.
Alrighty then. Hi. Welcome to this workshop of the Board of Education of Anne Arundel County. Tonight, the board will learn more from Superintendent George Arlotto and the school system staff about Maryland's charter school law and application process. This workshop is open to the public. However, there is no public testimony. This workshop is being broadcast live on AACPS TV, which can be found on Channel 96 on Comcast and Broadstripe, and Channel 36 on Verizon. High-definition broadcast can be seen on Channel 996 on Comcast, Channel 496 on Broadstripe, and Channel 1961 on Verizon. As a reminder to those here with us in person, guests are expected to wear a mask while visiting the Carol S. Parham building. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Arlotto.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, members of the board, for allowing us this opportunity to share some information with you about our charter and contract schools. The information we're going to share is fairly brief, as you have requested, and then we'll leave time for your questions and answers. Sitting before you is Mr. Pat Crane. Mr. Crane is our Director of Alternative Education, of which our charter and contract schools fall under his leadership. He is a font of knowledge with regard to with charter schools and contracts, not only here in Anne Arundel County, but around the state. He's well recognized as one of the leaders in supporting charter and contract schools. He's going to walk you through some information in general about the laws and how charters and contracts schools are governed, and then how we particularly support those schools. Also know that there aren't, as you know, or I think most of you know, there aren't a lot of charter schools in the state of Maryland. There are just a handful of counties that are supporting charter schools right now. We are one of those, with probably the third largest number behind Baltimore City and Prince George's County. We are the next with our charters and contracts in supporting this choice for students and families. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Crane.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Arlotto. President Ellis, Vice President Schelheim, members of the board. Again, my name is Pat Crane, Director of Alternative Programs. I think Dr. Arlotto did a great job of kind of setting this up tonight, and I welcome the opportunity to provide as much information as I can to you about charter and contract schools in Anne Arundel County. So with that, we will go. The first slide really is a slide about what guides our work. We'll start with the Maryland Charter School Law. There is a law on the books that guides how charter schools are to run and operate within the state of Maryland. That is a law to 2003, and back in 2000, legislation was first introduced and approved. It really was legislation that enabled school districts in Maryland for the first time ever to authorize charter schools. And so that law lays out, and it's been reauthorized several times since then, but it lays out specifically how charter schools are to operate within school districts. As well as the Maryland Charter School Law, charter schools and contract schools are also required to follow all Maryland educational law unless seeking a waiver, and unless that waiver is approved from any specific areas of the Maryland education law. All charter schools in Maryland are public schools and thus have to follow all laws and regulations, COMAR included. In addition to the Maryland Charter Law and all regulations and laws, we also have policy and regulations internally, which also help guide our work. Part of the charter school law requires that all school districts have policies and regulations that help guide the work that we do with our charter schools. So as you can see, we do have a policy and regulations on the books that really kind of outline specifically our application process, our hiring process, how our charter schools interact with their facilities, our admissions criteria, as well as how charter schools are going to comply with the charter law and charter contract that they have. To help additionally guide our work, there's an organization called NACSA, National Association of Charter School Authorizers. That really has been a huge help to us as we, years ago, rolled out charter schools in the district, just around their policies and their procedures, and how they support local school districts to help with the authorizing process. They've got workshops, they've got resources. We've been to several of the conferences in other states over the last several years, and it's really been kind of a helpful organization. So as you all, as the authorizer in Anne Arundel County, are looking for resources and support, that is our go-to organization as well. So I encourage you to go check them out and see what they have to offer. So I'm going to get into some specifics about the charter school law. Obviously, I'm not going to spend the whole night on it, or we could be here for several hours, but I'm just going to highlight some areas that I think you all might be interested in. So who can apply to open a charter school? So in short, there's really four areas or groups that can apply. So a staff of a public school, believe it or not, if enough staff got together and wanted to submit an application to turn their school into a public charter school. By law, they could do that. To date, I'm not sure anyone in the state has taken them up on that, but that is legal and could happen. A parent or guardian of a student who attends a public school in the county, a non-sectarian nonprofit entity, or a non-sectarian institute of higher ed in the state, or any combination of those four. The majority of applications that we typically get are submitted by non-sectarian nonprofit entities. So to date, those are the majority of applications we've seen in partnership with parents or guardians typically. I know there are some institutes of higher ed within the state of Maryland that do have a hand in some schools. Coppin State in Baltimore City runs a charter school. University of Maryland has a charter-like school in Prince George's County as well. So more and more colleges and universities are getting into the chartering sector. So the next slide, I think this is important for you all to know who the authorizer is in the state of Maryland. So according to the charter school law, the local board of education is the authorizer within the state of Maryland. So as you can see, each of you are up there and represent the authorizer here for Anne Arundel County. We'll talk a little bit more about what your role is as the authorizer moving forward, not only with the charter school process, but if you get a new application, which we do currently have, and I'll talk a little bit about that, what your role is with new applications as well. So funding. So funding is very generally worded within the state law. It basically says charter schools receive funding commensurate with other public schools in the local jurisdiction in which they operate. Those of you who have been following charter schools for years in the state of Maryland know that that wording at the beginning caused a lot of, I'll just say, confusion around with many districts that were really looking for the state to clarify what that really meant, because that wording means something different to every jurisdiction, and thus charter schools are really being funded unevenly across districts in the state of Maryland. So the State Board of Ed put together a funding formula that they hoped would clarify what charter school funding looks like in the state of Maryland. We do fund our charter schools in line with that funding model. And so to date, it's really kind of been helpful to us as our finance and budget folks work through how we're going to fund charter schools. Sorry, this mask is kind of hard to talk through. So another aspect of the charter school law that is really, really important to understand is the lottery process. By law, all charter schools have to run a lottery if more students apply than have seats available. To date, all of our charter schools typically go to lottery. Our lottery window runs concurrent with that window of which our magnet schools in the county also run. We found it was easier to align the windows of the charter school with the magnet school so that parents didn't have to balance two different windows when they were looking at options for students. They could just look at one window and think about where they wanted to have their child apply within the school choice options. Charter school window typically opens in early October and runs through mid-November. It runs through November 22nd this year. And at that point, the window will close. At that point, we will take our charter lists and we send it out to a third-party vendor who runs our charter school lotteries for us. Just in terms of integrity of the process, we, as well as our magnet schools, send our lottery out to be run by a third-party vendor. In terms of selectivity, there is no selectivity with charter school enrollment. So we cannot ask any specific questions about a child. If you think about it simplistically, it's put your name in a hat, and then we send that list out, and the gentleman who does our lottery basically picks the names out of the hat, and that's who gets into the school. So in addition to filling slots, there's also a wait list. So when we hear back from our third-party vendor, what he provides to us is a list of the first 50 students. Let's say the school is taking 50 students, this list of 50 students, and then everyone else is on a wait list. So if someone declines a seat, then we would go to the next person on a wait list. Now, at the end of that window, we don't close the enrollment portal. It remains open, but we just tell parents that if you apply late, you'll just automatically go to the bottom of the wait list. So parents still have an opportunity, even after the window closes to get their child into the charter school portal and on a wait list. Another question that we get quite frequently is, who are employees of our charter schools? Do they have to be employees of the school district? Do they have to be certified? Do they have to be part of the collective bargaining unit? And the answer is yes. Our employees are employees of Anne Arundel County Public Schools, and they are required to have the same certifications as any other teacher in the district that's teaching in those same positions in other schools. And they also fall into the same collective bargaining agreements as all of our other employees. There have been instances in the past where our charter operators have gone to TAC and negotiated agreements outside of the collective bargaining unit. Usually it's around a school day or length of school day. For example, our Monarch schools close early on Wednesdays for professional development. And they had to work that out with the TAC reps so that teachers were working the same number of hours as teachers in other schools. And TAC agreed that we would extend the other 4 days of the week to make up for the time when they got out earlier. So that's just an example of where you could negotiate a collective bargaining within the TAC agreement. I also want to add that in terms of the hiring process, all charter school teachers and staff are hired through Anne Arundel County Public Schools. So while charter school principals can go out and they can interview prospective teachers, eventually that teacher has to apply to Anne Arundel County School, and the charter school has to hire them through AACPS. And there's a couple of reasons we do that. One, we want to make sure that that teacher holds all the correct certifications to be hired in that position, and we have an HR staff that does that. It's also the background check. We want to make sure that that staff member goes through all correct background checks as well. So once a principal has identified an individual that they think would be a good candidate for the school, they require them to apply to AACPS, and then they can move forward with the hiring through HR Navigator, as all of our other principals and other schools have to do. All right, so role of the authorizer. So these are the big four for our authorizer, which is, again, the Board of Education. So the first thing there is application. So when we get an application to open a charter school here in Anne Arundel County, there's a lengthy review process that application has to go through. So once we take it through, and I'll get into more specifics about what that process looks like a little later in this presentation, but just know that ultimately the approval or denial of that application falls with you all as the authorizer. So again, we will come to you with a recommendation about an application, and you all will vote on whether to approve or deny. I'll give you more information as we go forward, though, because there are some specifics around that, but I just want to generally kind of walk you through your role. If an application is approved, then the next step is to negotiate a charter agreement. And that charter agreement really is a contract that lays out how that charter school is to operate over a term. So that term could be 3 years, it could be 5 years, it could be 7 years, it could be 10 years, whatever we negotiate with that group. Your approval has to happen for that contract to move forward. So by law or by State Board of Ed decision, that contract on a new application should be done no later than 30 days after approval from you all. The only other time you would approve contracts is on renewal applications, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So as I stated, our charter schools act on term limits, and so eventually those terms are going to be up. And when those terms are up, we will come before you to ask you to renew that application or not. To date, all of our charter schools and contract schools, fortunately, have all been renewed, but there are times when, maybe the school is not doing what it's supposed to do according to its contract, and the recommendation would be not to approve. So either renewal or not renewal would fall again on your decision. And then revocation. And so, fortunately, we've never had to revocate a charter. So the difference between revocation and non-renewal is a non-renewal is at the end of a term. Revocation would be in the midst of a contract. So, for example, it's a 5-year contract, and 2 years in, there's something that's happening so egregious at that school that we decide we need to shut it down. We would work, obviously, staff would work with the superintendent, and then superintendent would come to you and in a decision that you all would have to make to vote to revocate a charter contract or not. So a little bit about governing board versus operator, because these are a couple terms that you may hear from time to time. So all charter schools have to have a governing board, but not all charter schools have to have an operator. And so what I mean by that is, by law, if you open and operate a charter school in the state of Maryland, you have to have a governing board. And typically that's a nonprofit organization made up of individuals that have submitted an application and then provide oversight and accountability to that school. But what some governing boards choose to do is to contract with an operator to sort of delegate the day-to-day operations to that operator. And in Anne Arundel County right now, we have two operators. So the Children's Guild Alliance is the operator of the 3 Monarch schools, and Chesapeake Lighthouse Foundation is the operator of Chesapeake Science Point. Just some specifics about our schools. I thought you might be interested in just kind of walking through. You can go to the next slide. So Monarch Academy, which is in Glen Burnie, again, we talked about, it's operated by the Children's Guild. It's a kindergarten through 8th grade school serving approximately 679 students. It started back in 2009. So if you can believe it or not, we've got charter schools that are 13 years old. And they've been renewed several times. Their next renewal date is 2023-2024 school year. So that's coming up. And that's an expeditionary learning focused school. They work with EL. And so they are up due for renewal here in the next few years. Go to Chesapeake Science Point. Chesapeake Science Point, we talked a little bit about earlier, grades 6 through 12. By contract, they can serve up to 500 students. Their September 30th count this year was 498. They focus on math, science, technology. They're actually a 17-year-old school, so they are our most mature school. They've been around for a long, long time, and their next renewal date is 24-25 school year. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between a charter school and a contract school, because I've alluded to both tonight, and I want to make sure that you all have an understanding of the difference. So a charter school is constrained by a charter school law. And so we've talked a little bit about tonight about what the charter school law looks like and some of the parameters around the charter school law. Charter schools are in legislation, so there are very, very specific indicators in which we have to follow when a charter school is open and operate. A contract school, by contrast, is a school that we've partnered with an organization to open a school within our district that serves a need. So for example, Monarch Global and Laurel, we partnered with the Children's Guild to open that school to alleviate the overcrowding issues in the Maryland City, Brockbridge, and Jessup area. So we saw a need, which was overcrowding in those 3 schools. And so we went to the Children's Guild and we partnered and we collaborated and we decided to open a school that would just serve that catchment area. So again, if we were to open it as a charter school, that charter school would have to have been open to the entire district, because the charter law says that a charter school in a district in Maryland has to be open to the entire district. So we really couldn't have used a charter to accomplish our goal of reducing overcrowding in those 3 elementary schools. Monarch Annapolis is also opened to alleviate overcrowding in the Annapolis elementary schools. And so that's a contract school, and we partnered with the Children's Guild on the same thing. So again, the biggest area of difference is really around that attendance area. And then obviously, any federal, state, local policies and regs. Charter schools by law have to follow contract school because it's a partnership school with the district. We can agree to negotiate some room. If that operator says, look, I would love to come work with you. I would love to alleviate something within your district that you came to us about, but I need these things to operate more successfully. And at that point, we would be able to then partner with them and operate in that way to allow them the flexibility to operate in a way that would enable them to be successful. So who are our contract schools? So currently we have 2. The first one, next slide, Monarch Global Academy, which I just referred to in Laurel. So it's a kindergarten through 8th grade school. It's an international baccalaureate primary year program at the elementary, and it's a project-based learning school at the middle school. So again, the reason that we opened this school really was to alleviate the overcrowding in those 3 elementary schools. And for a while it worked, but then those schools started to fill up again. So, unfortunately, sometimes you alleviate overcrowding and then it continues to happen. But, I think that the school has really caught on over the last 8 years as a staple in that community. Literally, if you've never been there, it's almost right across the street from Brockbridge Elementary. And what I love most about it is Brockbridge and Monarch Global have really collaborated on a number of things. So it really shows the partnership that we have with that school. And they're due in 2023-24 for their first renewal. And then finally, Monarch Academy Annapolis serves about 810 students. It's an international baccalaureate primary year program. It's only K-5, does not have a middle school component. And that school's in its 5th year of operation. Charter school autonomy. Again, this is another big question I get because, I think a lot of times you hear charter school and you think, well, they can just do whatever the heck they want to do, right? Well, the answer is to some degree, yes, but most of the time, not really. And these are the areas where they have the most flexibility. So really we'll start with curriculum. So yes, all of our charter and contract schools are required to take state assessment. So while there is flexibility around the curriculum, they really have to align to Common Core state standards. So if they're, as we know, state assessments are aligned with Common Core, and if you're not teaching Common Core, your students are probably not going to be very successful on state assessments. So while they can have some flexibility in curriculum, we do really ask them to really focus on Common Core state standards. We really want their pacing guides to be aligned with kind of how we're teaching and how the state kind of paces out being ready for state assessment. So, resources in terms of resources that they use to teach students, we don't really tell them how to get to the end line. We just say that here's what you need to teach to get there, and then provide flexibility on how they do that. In terms of budgeting, we provide them with their per pupil allotment each year, and we determine their overall operating budget based on their September 30th count. So on September 30th, we determine how many students they have in their building. We pay them a per pupil allotment based on that. And then they've got a budget for themselves. So we don't dictate to them how they spend their money. We provide them the funds that by contract are due to them. And then we ask them to balance their books, balance their budget, make sure that they have enough money to make it through the year. And we don't just turn them loose. There are still some safety nets in place. We have our accounting and finance department works very closely with getting quarterly reports from them, really kind of assisting them in areas of oversight and accountability. We require a financial audit by each of them each year, so they are required to provide that to us. And we do site visits once a year where our finance folks go out and sit down with their finance people, and we really kind of go through their books to make sure that the budgeting side of things is being done with integrity. In terms of staffing, we do not give them a staffing allocation, unlike all of our other traditional public schools, where we kind of give them positions. We do not do that with our charter schools. They are responsible to staff their schools based on their budget. So, if they want an extra assistant principal or they want extra individuals in classrooms with teachers and they've got the money to afford it, then they can have that flexibility. In terms of the programming, again, their programming is what they're going to put into their application when they apply to open a school. So we approve, essentially, not only are we approving their school, but we're approving their program. So there's a lot of flexibility around what programs they do provide. Transportation, they contract with transportation vendors separate from us. So we do not have any oversight over their transportation. Legally, they don't even have to provide transportation if they choose not to. Fortunately, all of our charter schools do provide transportation. And so, when questions arise around buses not showing up or something happening with a driver, the nice thing is we can refer that back to the charter operator, who then can contact their vendor and take care of the problem with whatever the parents' issue is with the transportation. Most of our charter schools are in non-traditional facilities. Monarch Global in Laurel is built their own school, so that if you went to our 4 schools right now, you would see that Monarch Global is probably our only traditional school, if you will. That is a brand new school building that was built back when we opened the school. So it sort of fits a description of a school. Our other 3 schools are in non-traditional spaces, office parks that are built out. Monarch Annapolis is in the old Capitol Gazette building right off West Street. And so that's a very, very non-traditional space as well. But by state law, they have some flexibility around where they can run and operate their school, as long as it meets the state requirements for educational space. And they do have to provide ed specs when they build a building. Can't just build a building and put kids in it. They do work closely with our facilities department as well. And then we talked about some flexibilities around scheduling or school day, in terms of if they want a longer school day or they want to bring kids on Saturday, they can negotiate that as well. So I'm going to get in a little bit to the application process, because we do currently have an application that we're currently reviewing. And I think it's important for you all to kind of know the specifics around what that application process looks like. So by law, Maryland Charter School law specifically says we have 120 days from the time the application is submitted until the authorizer or the board makes a decision either approving or denying that application. So within that 120 days, a lot has to happen. We have a staff, a group of probably close to 20 individuals internally that review that application. We score the application. We bring a recommendation to Dr. Alato. Dr. Alato will then bring a recommendation to you all, and you all are going to be responsible for approving or denying that application. Now, it's important to understand, if you deny the application, they can go to State Board of Ed on appeal. That is written into the state charter law. They have every right to do that. And so that's just something to keep in mind as you're pondering the outcome of an application. And then I have board approves contract. If it's approved, then 30 days after that approval, I would be sitting back in front of you asking you to approve a contract that we negotiated with that group. So who is our charter applicant? So I don't really want to talk a whole lot about the specifics of the application. It is currently under review, but I think it's important, since I'm going to be coming back to you in early February. You should know now kind of who this applicant is and some of the specifics about it. So the applicant right now is Chesapeake Lighthouse Foundation, who currently operates Chesapeake Science Point, which is currently a charter school, as we talked about, within Anne Arundel County. Their proposal is to open a Chesapeake Science Point elementary school, kindergarten through 5th grade, focusing on robotics, virtual reality, and coding. Location is to be determined at this point. They've got some various facilities they're looking at, but nothing that I can definitively tell you today. This is where it would be if it were approved. So that's just some of the basic information about our current applicant. And then the application status. So they dropped their application off around October. Well, I won't say around, it was on October 22nd. Currently, November 15th, as we sit here today, it's being reviewed by internal staff. And then on February 2nd, I will come back before you with the findings of the application review. Dr. Alato at that board meeting will have a recommendation, and then we will ask you to vote on whether to approve or deny that application based on his recommendation. And it's important to know that by law, even though we have 120 days, February 2nd is not 120 days, because what we have to do is backdate to when you all have board meetings. So in reality, February 18th would be 120 days from the time they drop that off, but because there's a board meeting at the beginning of February, we have less than 120 days. So 120 days sounds like a long time, but it's really not. It goes very, very quickly, and there's a lot to review within that amount of time. So at the February 2nd board meeting, again, I will be up here presenting facts and findings to you about the application. Dr. Alato will make a recommendation, and we'll ask you to vote on that recommendation. Here's some helpful tidbits for you. I thought you might appreciate this. The State Board of Ed, over the course of the last 10 years or so, has opined on a number of State Board of Ed appeals. And within those appeals, I've pulled out some snippets to kind of help guide your work as an authorizer. And so this is really all around the application process, because again, If the application is denied and they can go on appeal to the state, it's important to know that we dotted our I's and crossed our T's within the authorizing and application process. So the first one is, while a formal hearing is not required, the charter applicant should have at least 24-hour notice the application will be considered at the board meeting. And I think that's a fair and transparent thing to do. If we're going to rule on an application, we need to give them at least a day's notice to know that their application is going to be discussed, and give them an opportunity to come in and at least be part of that that board hearing. And again, if the decision is to deny an application, best practice is that we give an applicant the opportunity to address any concerns publicly with the application itself. Next slide. The local board should be acting on a detailed recommendation, and we talked about that. Dr. Arlotto would provide a detailed recommendation to you, and you will act on that recommendation of either approving or denying an application. The law does not require that you all provide that in writing, but best practice is that it should be in writing. Next slide. The local board must provide, in addition to its decision approving or denying an explanation or rationale for its decision. So again, early on in the chartering process over the years, we had some boards that just said, we're denying it. And the applicant said, well, why? And we said, well, we're just denying it. And so they appealed to the state board, and the state board said, look, if you're going to deny an application, you need to provide a detailed rationale for why the denial was made. And then again, the local board just needs to provide more than just a basic explanation for the denial of a charter application. It needs to be more specific than that. And again, part of the recommendation that Dr. Arlotto will bring to you will be all of the facts and findings from the Charter Review Committee as well. So you'll have plenty of information to mull over as you're considering a decision. All right. So that's my presentation tonight. Obviously, you want more information about charter schools. We are very up to date on our charter school website. And so you can go there and get as much information as you want about charter schools in Anne Arundel and contract schools in Anne Arundel County. And so with that, I'll take questions.
I see multiple lights, so I'm going to go around in order. And starting with Mr. Silkworth.
Thank you. You had mentioned that staff in a public school could in fact apply for a charter school.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me some idea of what that might look like?
Well, you know, it's hard to say because it's never happened. But
Right.
It's happened in Baltimore City on a couple occasions. And so I think what happens in that case is the majority of teachers, I think there's a threshold of, like, let's say 75% of teachers get together and they feel like they could write an application and submit it to the district, and they could put together an or an operating or governing board that could oversee a school that looks somehow different than what that school currently looks like. And so it could be a school, you know, like I said, in the city that maybe is failing, and just for whatever reason, you know, they can't get their test scores up, attendance isn't good, and teachers get together and think, hey, we can do a better job operating this school. And so that's essentially what that would look like.
Okay. And you mentioned the Chesapeake Science Elementary
Mhm.
K-5 that is they've currently applied.
That's right.
If that is approved,
Mhm.
when would that school likely open?
They would open in the 23-24 school year.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Frank? Sorry.
Yes, so you said that the application review would be on February 2nd.
Yep.
When do we start getting information specific to this request? I know that Dr. Arlotto will give us his recommendation, but when do we start getting that information?
Well, typically you would get that in your board packet.
Just
That-
a couple days before the meeting?
Well,
or?
it's more than a couple days, right? It's a week or so. Yep.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Is there any way to get that any sooner?
it very much depends. So the short answer is yes.
Okay.
But it very much depends on the review. 120 days is not a lot of time. The team is going through everything from curriculum, instructional delivery, the facility itself, budget and finance, safety and security. All of those pieces are being reviewed by the team to make sure that it's a place you would want to put your children in school. And so we'll get, as soon as we can have some information available, I'll see how quickly the team is going through. We'll get it to you so that you can review some of the information. But, and it does give us a little bit of time until the 18th to have that full 120 days. But there's a lot that the team has to review to bring a recommendation to me and then me to you.
Yeah. I want to make sure that we have enough time to review too, just to read through all of it, especially during budget season and everything else.
We're thinking
Yeah.
exactly
I
the same
know.
thing. Yes.
All right. Well,
lot.
thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
And
for
we'll
that.
work as quickly as we can to get our information to Dr. Alato so that there is ample time
Okay.
prior to that board meeting.
And then you said that regardless of whether it's approved or denied, we would still need to discuss our decision and give a rationale. Does that have to be at that meeting that we do that, or is
Mhm.
that something that we would do after the fact?
No, that typically would be at the meeting.
Okay.
So if you deliver a decision at that meeting, it should be delivered with the rationale for why that was made.
Okay.
And it can be verbal or it can be in writing. Best practices that it is in writing.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Corkadell, do you have anything?
No questions at this time, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Omusori?
So in terms of the lottery, I heard you speaking that most, if not all, of the decisions are made by lottery. Is there a test when it comes to charter schools, or is it just based on application?
It's just application.
Okay.
By law, we are not allowed to ask any personal information about a student. We can't test. We can't have tryouts. We can't do anything. It's strictly by law, has to be random. So we can't ask whether they have an IEP or not. We can't ask what their financial situation is. We can't ask what their academic record is. So it's just basically, like I said, like your name goes in a hat, and that's all that the person on the other end sees when they're running the lottery. And again, that's based on law. We'd be in lottery jail if we asked any personal information and made any decisions that, if there was any break in the integrity of the process, that's a big no-no.
Okay, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer at this early in the process, but do you know how big for Chesapeake Science Point Elementary, what type of class, how big you want the school to be student-wise? Like how hundreds of students, 300, 400?
I don't have that information yet. It's in the application, but again, that's still under review, so we're still trying to work our way through. So I'd be disingenuous if I threw a number out today when I haven't even gotten to that section yet.
And we don't want to, in all honesty, don't want to talk about an application that's been presented to the team
Right.
at this point. There's we're passing no judgment, and we're not talking about the application.
Yep.
Dr. Tobin?
Thank you. Just about sort of the process of how we handle charter schools. What's the, you mentioned a site visit for financial review and so forth. What's the annual or regular review schedule for charters?
So we do a formal site visit each year with our charter schools. So we do both what we call an instructional visit and a compliance visit. So the instructional visit is exactly what it's called. It's a group of internal folks from central office. We also grab some comprehensive school principals from around the county, and we go in and we do a full scale instructional visit. So we spend the day visiting classrooms, and then we come back as a group and we debrief on our findings, and then we meet with the principal and the principal's leadership team to go over the findings for the day. Now, in addition, we're also in the schools all the time.
Right.
Because they are Anne Arundel County Public Schools. The way they're set up is they fall under my office, and I'm also the supervisor of the principal. So it's helpful that I always have a foot in the door.
Mhm.
There are some counties that they only go in once a year, and then they try to make a renewal recommendation, and they're like, well, we were here 4 times. But I mean, we're there constantly, and so we're meeting with the principals constantly. And because it's a school within our district, they're tied into all the same student reporting information systems as all of our other schools. So I can go onto Power School and run a report at any time and grab their attendance. I can look at their assessment scores. So nothing's ever a surprise when it comes to a renewal. And then we do a compliance visit each year too, where we send our finance folks in, our transportation, our food service, our special ed to review special ed records. So it's a full top to bottom compliance review as well each year.
And presumably facilities and such like
Facilities,
as well.
correct. Yep.
Okay. And what is the oversight, if you will, of their governing boards?
If there's what?
So they have to have a governing board.
That's right.
Which they determine,
Mhm.
presumably, but presumably there's some set of standards that governing board must meet. And how is that handled?
So we refer to our governing boards. State of Maryland has a nonprofit organization that works specifically with our charter school governing boards, and that's the recommendation that we make for them. We really don't want to get into the work with the boards themselves, but we can certainly outsource resources to them to help guide their work. There's also a charter school conference every year that we encourage our charter boards to go to. It's not the National Charter School Authorizer, it's the National Charter School Conference, and there's plenty of board workshops. I go to board meetings probably once a year, just to kind of sit in on the board meetings, watch the process, want to make sure that the process is public, make sure that they do have an agenda, make sure that parents are invited. And so there's some integrity around that process as well. But we try not to get too much into the micromanagement of the board itself. But if we sense that there are issues with the board and the oversight process, we can recommend resources for them to use. There are several folks around the nation too that do charter school board governance workshops, and we've brought them in before as well.
But specifically in your review, do you check things like that they have appropriate materials that board members have to sign?
Yeah, so that's
kind
part of the review process.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right.
And very specifically, when we go into a renewal year, we do not only interviews with the parents and students and teachers, but we also bring the governing board and the operator in to interview them as
Okay.
well. And as part of that review process, they have to submit all of their contractual documents to us as part of that review.
Okay, great. Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
Ms. Schallheim?
Yes, thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Just a couple of questions with regard to facilities and identification of the facility. I mean, that's a huge capital outlay. That's on the onus of that is on the group coming to us, not part of our operating or capital budget. Is that an accurate statement?
On the front end, yes.
On the front end.
That's right. So we would not pay them anything until they actually started operating. So even if they're approved, let's say they're approved on February 2nd, we wouldn't start providing a per pupil allotment to them until probably July 1st of the year they're going to start accepting students into the school. So that would be a year and a half that they would have to come up with the funding to purchase or rent a building. They'd have to come up with the funding to renovate a building. They would have to come up with the funding to begin to buy furniture and to outfit. So there's a lot of capital outlay on the front end, before they even start receiving a penny.
And that
from the
goes for
district.
any applicant. I wasn't speaking specifically on
Any applicant.
as to the one in the hopper, just any charter school. So
Mhm.
do those schools have to be remodeled to a certain spec?
Mhm.
They do. Okay.
Mhm. There are state guidelines as to what a facility has to look like, particularly a public school in the state of Maryland. There is some flexibility around those guidelines. Typically what happens is they would get an architect and they would lay out an ed spec, and we would submit that ed spec to the state of Maryland's facility department. They would then review and provide feedback to us. We would then go back to the applicant and provide and seek feedback from them on those clarifying questions. And then it typically is up to us to approve those ed specs and to give them the green light to move forward. If you typically go in our charter schools, their classrooms, for the most part, probably aren't exactly the same size as our other schools. But again, finances are an issue, and so it's hard to, for them to come up with $30 or $40 million to build a building. So there is a smaller scale building that they've made work.
Okay.
The only caveat to your question, Ms. Schallheim, is
Yes.
there is a state charter school grant upwards of
Oh.
about $900,000 that charter applicants can apply and get approved for. And if they get approved for that, there's some very specific things that they can use that funding for. But that typically will bridge the gap between application approval and opening your doors.
Got it. And do all of our contract and our charter schools own their buildings, or are they rented
Mm-mm.
space?
I think one owns, the rest rent.
Okay.
Mhm.
So that's an acceptable, as long
Mhm.
as it meets the facility meets the needs.
Yeah,
And
and if you
the
think about it,
requirements.
if a young group that wants to open a school is not going to have the credit worthiness to go buy a building, so
Right.
typically they're going to work with a landlord or a building operator to rent back from that landlord.
And
And then
then-
maybe once they're established 5, 7, 10 years and they've been open long enough, then they have the capital and the credit worthiness to then move forward and purchase that building. And really it's you want to minimize your risk on the front end as a charter operator. I mean, if you go
Absolutely.
buy a building and 2 years later you fold, you're stuck with a really expensive asset.
Absolutely.
So I think they're better off leasing. That's just my opinion.
Two more really tiny questions. The first has to do with budget. Do they have to budget to the 15 or so state categories, just as we do?
They do, for purposes of submitting that budget to us for review, but they better have a whole lot more than 15 categories within their charter school budget, because remember, they got a budget for snow removal, and they've got a budget for landscaping, and they've got a budget for cleaning the building.
Oh,
and
sure. They're underneath the particular category.
Correct.
So operation of plant, maintenance of
Yes.
plant.
Yeah, so when they submit a budget to us, they will submit it under those budget categories. But
Got
then
it.
when we go in and audit their books, they've got, Uber spreadsheets that show line item after line item for
Yes.
the specifics of each category.
And then my last question, super quick.
Mhm.
The one in the applicant, the pending applicant, is that a charter or a contract school?
Charter school.
Charter school.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Dunn?
Thank you.
Excuse me, very nice presentation.
Thank you.
I had the privilege of visiting Chesapeake last week and very impressed with just the whole charter system process. So very good introduction into tonight's presentation. A couple of questions that I didn't ask them that I do have for us is wait list. I really didn't understand the wait list because the wait list is daunting, so I hear. And then I heard you say in your presentation that based off of the overflow, or if there's not enough spaces in the school that you have, that you all would do a contract to school. When you have such a wait list, what is the determining factor on where you decide if you need to contract out another school system, another school, or how do you draw that line?
So that actually, when we talked about contract schools, we talked about alleviating overcrowding at our traditional schools. So, for example, like with Laurel, Monarch Global, there was overcrowding at Brockbridge Elementary, Maryland City Elementary, and Jessup Elementary. So because it was cheaper for us to contract and bring in the guild to build a school to alleviate that overcrowding, that's why we made that decision. So we didn't necessarily make that decision based on wait list of other charter schools. We did it based on overcrowding at current schools.
Okay. And then the other question is, you said the application is just stick your name in a hat?
I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but it's an online portal that you go in and you submit your child's name. And other than your address and phone number and grade, there's really no other identifying information that we are allowed to ask for.
Okay, so that's really why I asked the question, because in my mind, the application process and the third party still has discrimination because your address is going to tell you the poverty level that you live in, yada, yada, yada. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, but
But what I will say, not to interrupt you, but when we send the spreadsheet out to our third-party vendor, all we're sending is name and grade.
Okay,
and,
that's what I
and
wanted to know.
magnet ID number. That's it. So
Okay.
the reason we ask address is because we have to know, like for Monarch Global, if you don't live in those 3 catchment areas, you can't apply. So if you don't put your address in, we don't know whether or not that's a school that you would qualify for. But the address really is no determining factor. And matter of fact, the gentleman that does our lottery and out in Missouri somewhere, he doesn't even see that information.
Okay. All right. And then my last question is about, is there any comparison with the public school versus the charter school versus contract and the ranking of how how well the students are doing or not doing?
Yeah, so our students take all of the state assessments that other schools take. So we could go to Maryland Report Card and we can pull down all of the schools and we can compare and contrast. Obviously for the last 2 years we haven't had that data, but I can say prior to that, our charter and contract schools in some instances are scoring above where some of our students are in the rest of the county, and in some instances they're scoring at, and in some instances they're scoring below. So to give you there's a lot of information and data that gets rolled up into that, but I would say that some charter schools are doing a really, really good job, and some charter schools still have some growth in terms of state assessment data. Sure.
Thanks for the presentation.
You're welcome.
So just a few questions. So just to summarize, the question has come up a number of different ways, but are magnet schools, students have to qualify whether in some sort of format, an audition, a portfolio, an interview. The only qualification for applying to a charter school is being a student in the county.
That's it.
Right. Okay. And so based on that, they apply and they are equal in the lottery.
Yep.
Okay. So you mentioned IEP and when you were talking about that. So what are charter schools' obligations to meet the IEP, and what is your observation on how they're doing with that?
So our charter schools are not exempt from serving students with special needs. If a student, and again, because there's no qualifying information, a student can apply, they get accepted, they might have an IEP. And if that's the case, then the charter school would have to serve or staff their school in a sufficient manner to serve the students' needs that are identified on the IEP. So in terms of, they're still public schools and they're still public school students. So our charter schools are not exempt from that. I believe that our charter schools, and this is based on site review and site visits and having our special ed team go out and audit records and sit in classrooms and observe teachers teaching students with IEPs. I think they do a magnificent job. I think that compared to any other school in the district, I think our charter schools are right in there with complying with IEP needs and providing a high level of service for students with IEPs.
And if you were to do a class size comparison, is there a difference between our traditional public schools and our charter school class sizes?
I think the ranges vary. We have charter school classes with as low as 15 students, but we also have charter school classes with as many as 25 students. So I think it depends on the grade level. I think it depends, especially when you start getting into the high school level, then you're talking about, have enough students enrolled in Calculus 1. And so is that class going to be smaller than an Algebra 1 class? But I think by and large, our charter school and contract schools classes typically tend to be a little bit smaller, but not in all cases. And in some cases, they're probably just the same amount of students in classes.
So if they were smaller, would that mean that they have a different budgetary model than we do? In other words, they have to be able, as you said, we don't allocate positions to them. So
That's
they
right.
have a different configuration of positions that would lead to more smaller class sizes or a different ratio. That's how that would be accomplished. Is that right?
To a degree, yes. And
Mhm.
keeping in mind that there is each of our charter and contract schools have a finite number built into the contract that you have signed with them.
Mhm.
So they are budgeting to 490 students or 500 students or 360 students. They're budgeting and looking at the number of students they have in grades 2, 3, 4, and 5. So there's a little more finality in that sense, in that they know how many
Mhm.
that they can top out at. Where in the other public schools, we don't have that ability to just say top out. Say no, we're not taking any more students.
Right.
But they then have the ability, and I think to your point, and it's a good one, Mrs. Ellis, is they have the ability to staff their building the way they so choose.
Mhm.
And so it's on any given year, they might say, well, on this year, because of our current enrollment, we're going to have 2 library and media specialists. And then they see that their enrollment goes up a little bit and they hit more of their plateau or more of their top
Mhm.
end. And they decide the next year to have a single media specialist and convert that period position to a teaching position.
And finally, for me, a question was asked about a performance comparison
Mhm.
between our charter schools and our other schools. And certainly in at least some cases, they've had extremely high performance.
Mhm.
How do we use that information to benefit us? Do we learn things from them that we can apply to our own educational practices?
Well, I guess the best way for me to respond to that is I believe, and through Dr. Lotto's leadership, that as a district, we have a great relationship with our charter schools. And so we don't separate our charter and contract schools from the rest of our schools. We collaborate and we work together. And, to your question about site reviews, I always put a team together that includes comprehensive school principals as well as internal central office staff as part of those site reviews. And we do that for a reason. We do that because we want to expose everybody in the district to what's happening within our charter schools. And I mean, it's great to see because there's nothing better than sitting around a table at the end of a site visit and listening to a principal at X comprehensive school say, wow, when I go back to my school, this is really neat. I'm going to take this back with me. And so I just think that collaboration that we offer with our schools is unlike any other district. And I think that's fostered by Dr. Alato and his kind of vision for how he wants charter and contract schools within Anne Arundel County to operate as part of an entire district. They are public school students. They are Anne Arundel County public school students. So we have to look out for them and we have to make sure that they're getting the best education possible.
I appreciate that response. I'm a big supporter of school choice because that is how we can learn from each other and learn
Mhm.
best practices. And I'm glad that we do have that partnership.
Mhm.
If there are any more questions, you can hit your light. I'm not going to go back around. I feel like everyone had a good opportunity to ask their questions. And I see no more lights. Dr. Alato.
Thank you. So I would just end with emphasizing some of the points that Mr. Crane added there at the end, in that when I'm out publicly talking or meeting with this board and talking about our 84,000 students, I'm talking about our students that are enrolled in our charter and contract schools. They're not separate and apart in any way, shape, or form when we talk about our schools and their successes and where they need growth. I can't speak to what happens around the state and around the country, though I'm aware of some of those relationships that exist or may not exist between the authorizers in a board of education and the operators in charter schools in both the state and around the country. But I can tell you we've built really solid relationships. It's not been easy at times. We've had to come to an understanding about what that relationship is going to be. But all of the supports that are in place for each one of our schools, our charter and contracts are included in that. So in their meetings of level principals or clusters, those principals in the charter and contract schools are part of that. When there is professional development for the administrators or teachers or special education or content areas each of the charter staffs are invited and to be part of that professional development. So they are part of the family, and as we look at it each and every day, they're one of our 84,000 plus students, and we're looking for them to be successful. And one of the key differences or I guess I shouldn't say differences, one of the joys is that you go through each one of our schools, and in particular our charter and contract schools, and the students and the parents are delighted to be there. You have visited Chesapeake Science Point, and many of you and the children are happy to be there. It is their school. They embrace it each and every day, and I think some of their successes are a direct result of that. So we're very proud of the work that we've done up to this point. But I can also tell you that we have very high standards for anybody that wants to apply to bring a charter school into Anne Arundel County. We have very high standards for all of our schools. And so not just everybody gets to operate in Anne Arundel County. I hope you're proud of that. We are proud of that. We will go through every application very, very with a fine-tooth comb, as it were, to make sure that they can meet our standards and our expectations. Because if somebody's going to bring a new charter school group into our school system, we want to make sure that they're delivering above and beyond, that they have something that's new and unique that we're unable to bring to our students, and that they add to what all of our offerings, because we see it, as you said, as a program of choice, that we want that programming to be new and unique so that students and parents will be attracted to that school. So we're looking forward to going through the process of reviewing this next application. But the point of tonight was to give you some background information. It's new to each and every one of you. As a board, you've not gone through that process yet. Before we got too far down the road, I asked for permission from your president to present to you tonight, so you had some of that information in your minds and your thinking as we move forward, and eventually we'll bring the application forward. So thank you for the time.
Great.
Well done.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And I do appreciate, on behalf of the board, Dr. Arlotto, for you recommending this workshop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beginning public hearing at 6:30.